Hey everybody, I'm back with Chris Watson. He is I'm going to say the public relations or spokesman for the New York State Public High Schools Athletic Association. You know him by that wonderful smile and those bright orange suits. And I think he even has a yellow suit. But you see him.
If they make a rainbow-esque color, I own it. Like there's not a lot in the closet I'm missing at this point.
Well, I'll tell you, Chris, we missed you at the Harbor Center this past winter, and then we missed you during the spring for the sports championships and things of that nature. But it looks like things are getting closer to maybe making a decision on the fall season. So we'll have to wait and see if we see you at the Carrier Dome late this fall around Thanksgiving. And I would imagine an orange suit.
It's a dome tradition. Now, if it's not the dome anymore, the stadium or whatever it is, it's still orange and blue. So, there's certain traditions you have to uphold. For as much as I try to, mix it up and rotate from season to season and sport to sport, I've told everybody, I say, you've seen them all. There's nothing left in reserve anymore. Everything I own, you've already seen. I haven't held anything back for a rainy day. So there's nothing left in the tank.
My question is, have you inspired other members of your executive committee into maybe getting a little bit out of their comfort zone when it comes to style?
I have taken this one niche of my wardrobe and kept it to myself. Nobody else seems to be interested in branching out and going down that way. I've had more people tell me that they want to buy me jackets than I've inspired them to go purchase their own. So it seems like a one-way street, and I'm just fine with that. The biggest one I get is, oh, you look like Craig Sager. I'm like, very rarely did I ever think in my life that I would be called Craig Sager, and not necessarily for my broadcasting skill, but for a different set of skills that has led me down this path. So what can I say? The Saratoga race course started it all, and here we are.
Chris, why don't you tell us how you got into the position and a little bit about your background, where you went to school, and what you're doing now for the New York State Public High School Athletic Association?
Sure. So my official title with NYSPHSAA is the Director of Communications. It's a role that I've been in for coming up on 4 years now. I started in the summer of what would have been 16. And prior to that, my only experience in the world of communications and the world of the real world post-college was television. I was a TV sports anchor, and I worked at the local stations as a sports anchor. I started out as a sports anchor, producer, reporter, then graduated to producer, anchor, and kind of worked my way up to sports director, and eventually, kind of pinged around the state a little bit. I didn't really get out of my central New York comfort zone for a long time. I worked in Syracuse, Utica, back to Syracuse, and then came to Albany. And that was what I did for almost 20 years. I think I did it for 18 years, and I was a TV sports guy, and that kind of transitioned me well into what I'm doing now.
Talk about your education, where you went to high school and then college.
So Central New York native, so Oswego is home. Family still lives there, so Oswego High School, 2 years of community college at Herkimer County Community College in the Mohawk Valley outside Utica, then back home to SUNY Oswego to finish for 2 years. And those were all my CNY roots, and that's what kind of kept me home for all those years.
You mentioned working in television. You didn't have to go too far. You got your start in the local TV market. Did you ever think that maybe you would have to go to like another market to kind of get the exposure if you were going to end up at a place like an ESPN or Fox Sports?
It's kind of funny. I look back on it now, and when you first graduate college. And for me, it was Oswego to Syracuse, and that was like an hour away, and that was home. That was the home market, and that's where it was very fortunate that I was able to start. I did an internship in what was my final semester of senior year, and that took me up until May when I graduated from college. And in that 1 month break from May to June, that station had a job opening, and I was fresh on their mind, and I had just left and done a good job, and they had a spot, and it worked out really, really well. And, for me, it was convenient because family was here, friends were here, and I never left New York. And then there's part of me that, you look back on it now when you're in your early 20s and late 20s and you could be pinging around anywhere you want in the country. There's part of me that wonders, like, would it have been fun to move to, Idaho and then come down to Texas and then eventually come home? And, everybody took their own path, and mine was to stay here. And it worked out the way it was supposed to.
When you were going through your early stages of your career, what are some of the fondest memories you have, events covered, athletes covered,
Yeah.
things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, when you grow up, in the market that you eventually work in, I'm a Central New York guy, so my affinity to Syracuse is unmatched. I mean, that was my team. So covering Syracuse University athletics meant the world to me. Watch it. I was there when Donovan McNabb was a senior, so that dates how old I am and how long I've been working in the business. I got to cover him in his senior year. I got to be there when he led that program, to major bowls, and that program was, at the top of the world for what that small community had. And I got to be there at Syracuse University basketball games with 30,000 people. And, I was very fortunate that one of my stops along the way took me back to Syracuse in the year that the Orange won the national championship, when Carmelo was there, when Jerry McNamara was a freshman. And I got to be there, every step of the way, from the Big East tournament to the first round to the, to Albany, to be at the, regional round, and then to go to New Orleans for the Final Four. And that's something I'll never forget. That was, I've got to do a lot of cool stuff and go to a lot of cool places, but being a part of that ride when that team won the national championship, because it was my team, the one I grew up rooting for, that was pretty cool.
You're working with the New York State Public High School Athletic Association 4 years now.
Yeah.
When you were covering sports for your local market, how often did you look at the high schools for stories on a nightly basis or weekly basis? It seems like from the Section 3 area, high school sports is right up there with the Syracuse University. I noticed that the papers out there have pages devoted to high school sports, where in other markets, Western New York, we don't get a lot of high school coverage here. We're kind of looking at Section 3 as, maybe the pinnacle. That's where we were trying to get things to. Just talking about high school sports and being able to cover it at a much wider scope, if you will.
Everywhere I've worked, at every station I've been at, and now this job included, obviously being kind of, very interwound into the high school sports community. Prior to that, in the TV world, every place I worked, every station I was at, every market I worked at, the high school sports were a number one, and that includes when I worked in Syracuse and we had Syracuse University, which, we always joke that was our pro team. Well, we still had 2 nights a week that we dedicated to high school football coverage on Fridays and high school basketball coverage on Tuesdays and Fridays. I mean, those were the nights. And, you'll not find a bigger lacrosse community than Central New York. So high school lacrosse was huge. When I went to Utica and you work there and you don't have a pro team, and you have minor league sports and you don't have a huge encompassing Division I program right in your backyard, Syracuse is an hour, 90 minutes down the road, the high school sports was everything. I mean, that's what people gravitated towards. And then when I came to Albany, I found the same thing. I thought, Albany and Syracuse are very similar. And I come here and I find that, there's the base of people here in the Albany area that eat, live, eat, and breathe Siena and U-Albany and Union and RPI and those Division I programs. But at the end of the day, it still comes back to the high school athletics. It's that community pride. It's that local flair of sports. It's the kids that people knew and the families, the names that they remember. It always comes back to high school sports, and it comes back to that, winning for your community and what does a state title mean for your school. And if they've not done it in 30 or 40 years, being that group of young men or young women who won it, it's kind of that bond that lasts forever. So everywhere I've been, high school sports have always been at the top of the list.
When you graduated from Oswego, you obviously entered into television, something you wanted to do, but this is different. What attracted you to this particular position, and wanting to leave television? Is it something that you've been there, done that, and this maybe added a little bit more stability?
It was the right time for me to look for something else. At the time, 4 years ago, I was married, had 2 young kids, and it was hard at the time to work nights. I mean, the sports industry as a whole isn't a 9-to-5 job. The news anchor, sports anchor position isn't a 9-to-5 job. It's a 3 to midnight job. It's a 2 to 11 job. They don't play sports at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday because it's convenient for you and your family life. They play it at 7 o'clock at night because that's when it's convenient for everybody else. And you have to be able to adapt to that. And the other thing is, they play sports on weekends. It's hard when you have, as I said, at the time, had a wife and had 2 young kids, and it was hard. It was hard to balance that. And you can only be missing for so long when it comes to needing to be there for your kids for bedtime and bath time and books and things like that, and kind of popping in and out for dinner. And it just became too hard. And I was very fortunate that the transition was so easy to this. If I would have had to gone from, the sports industry and the media business to a standard regular 9-to-5 desk job in some different, agency that I'd never been a part of, that would have been really hard. But coming here where I already knew the sports and I knew kind of the layout of the way things worked, it was an easy transition, and, it worked out the way it was supposed to.
When you were going for this position, how important was it for you to have those relationships with the high school coaches, the ADs, to kind of help you get in touch with maybe having the edge on other candidates for the position you're in? How important was it to build those relationships?
It was important in the sense that I knew, a little bit of the structure, and I knew a little bit about what the association was, and I knew a little bit about how things ran. Once I got here and got into the interview and then started the job, I realized I didn't really know as much as I thought I did. You know what I mean? As far as, you think the association is this group of people sitting in Latham, New York, who say, this is the way it's going to be, this is what we do, this is when we're playing games, and here's the book, take it and go do it. It doesn't work like that. It's not a dictatorship. You know what I mean? We have committees upon committees who look at every aspect of what we do and say, this is what's best for student athletes, and then take it down to your committees, your sections across the state, and your coaches and your athletic directors, and get their input and say, does this work? Is this the best way to do it? What can we do to better serve student athletes? And I think that's something that, that my involvement with student athletes was minimal in terms of going to games, covering them, see them at the pinnacle, at the highest of highs, at the lowest of lows when they don't win a state championship game. But here, the involvement is more when it comes to how can we further that? What can we do for student athletes? How can we get them more involved? How can we make the experience even better? And we rely on the people that are with the kids every day, the athletic directors, the coaches, the teachers. And that's where I think I've learned a great deal about, opening up and learning more about how the association works.
Would you say it's been fulfilling in ways you didn't necessarily imagine when you first took the job?
100%. I think you asked earlier, how did my relationships with coaches and, administrators and athletic directors help? That was, I think you take that for granted to some degree, because when I go to work during a sports season, very rarely did I sit down at my desk and spend all 8 hours at my desk working, internally all day long. I'd go in, I'd get my assignments, I'd get my stuff, I'd get my gear, I'd go out the door, and I'd go to, fill in the blank number of practices or games. And I'd have an interaction all the time with coaches and ADs and players and parents and stuff like that. And you take that for granted because that becomes the norm. You're always interacting with people in the field. Now, I spend more time in the office, and then 3 times a year during the championship season of fall, winter, and spring, I get to travel the state. I get to be at the culminating event of every championship that I can be at, and I see the highest of highs, and my interaction with those people is great because they're on the biggest stage. High school sports is not the end-all, be-all of these kids' lives, but in that moment, this is what they've worked so hard to get to a lacrosse championship game, to get to a football final in the Carrier Dome, to get to a track and field championship, either indoor or outdoor. This is what they've worked to get to, and you get to see them in that moment and interact with them. And I've been really fortunate to get to give them their championship medal, get to give the team their state championship plaque, and that by far is my favorite part of the job.
All right, so I got to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
Out of all the state finals that you've been through in your current role, not as a reporter,
Yep.
but in your current role,
Yep.
when you see these different host sites and things of that nature, what's been just an unbelievable atmosphere? What's been the best atmosphere for you, and would you say is probably the best atmosphere for the athletes. And obviously I'm in Western New York, so it doesn't have, I'm not trying to get you to say Harbor Center at all, or because it's not mine and I'm from here.
Yep.
But from a executive's position for you, when you go to a site for a state championship event, what's just the most eclectic, the most amazing, exciting place to be when it comes
I
down
would have
to
a
it?
hard time. Yeah, I would have a hard time picking one because they are all so uniquely different. And very often, in this office, we find ourselves talking about, what are the matchups going to be? And what I mean by that is, if we're hosting the basketball championships in Binghamton, obviously if Section 4 does well and sends 4 teams to the state semifinals or advances 3 teams to the state championships, then the crowds are going to be larger because they're right in their backyard. And the same is true of football in Syracuse. If Section 3 does well and Section 3 sends more teams to the state championships, naturally the crowds are going to be bigger because they're right in their backyards. One example was a couple years ago, Rochester did extremely well in Section 5 in the boys lacrosse finals. Well, you go to St. John Fisher and Victor and Pittsford are in the finals, and it's a stone's throw away from St. John Fisher for them. So they brought everybody from the community. Helps that it's on a Saturday, helps that it's a gorgeous day in June. That atmosphere can't be beat. And, those are the things I take away from it. From an individual standpoint, when you're, indoors and it's not a team sport per se, that wrestling championship is hard to beat. When we're in the Times Union Center and that Saturday night comes and, you've wrestled all day Friday, you've wrestled into the night Friday, Saturday morning you've wrestled your semifinals to know who's going to be in the championship matches. You've wrestled through Saturday afternoon for the wrestlebacks to get your 3 through 7 or 8. And then that Saturday night comes and we get 10,000 or 12,000 people in the Times Union Center, 2 mats going at once, Division I, Division II, 15, championships handed out. That's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I'm hoping to get to that wrestling championship one of these years, hopefully sooner than later. So we do have to talk about, we have some dates that we're waiting on for some decisions to make. You have a committee right now, a COVID committee, if you will.
Yep.
When do they meet again? And when do you expect them to make give you their analysis on when they believe that schools throughout Western New York, the state, will
Yep.
be able to start participating again? And at the end of the day, does it come down to whether or not the governor of New York State says you can go back to school
Yep.
before they
So
can
our
make a
COVID
realistic
task force,
decision?
the COVID task force that we've formed, which is basically a group of, educators and officials and administrators and people involved in our organization, but also from the governor's office, from the health services, from the CDC, everybody from around the state, they will meet for the first time on Wednesday, June 10th. So that day is coming. They'll have their first meeting at 9 a.m. And essentially this group in their first meeting has a pretty long agenda to just lay out, where are we? What do we know about your individual regions of the state? What are the latest guidelines and information that we have? And where can we go from here? So much of what we have done and continue to do when it comes to COVID-19 is take the information from the government, take the information from Governor Cuomo, from the health officials, and say, okay, where are we right now? And it's been eye-opening because it changes every day. It changes by the week. And did I ever think when I left this office in March, getting ready to come to Harbor Center to go to the hockey championships, I wouldn't be back in my office. I'd be back in my office 6 times into June. I mean, I don't think any of us could have predicted that. I think that the COVID task force will get together. They'll hear everybody's concerns from wherever they are across the state, and where do we go from here? And then that task force will reconvene at the end of the month. I think the goal is to get together at the end of June and reassess. And I think that group, while it's not a governing body, a recommending body that can say, here's what's going on, this is what this group thinks, and can take it to our executive committee, and in this case, our central committee, which meets at the end of July, and say, this is where we're at, this is what the task force is thinking. And I think at the end of the day, we're all hopeful. I mean, that's all we can be. We are hopeful that come the fall, things will be better. I feel like I've said it to a million people. we don't know what the fall is going to look like, and we have to be willing to, to adapt and roll with the punches. But we have to be hopeful that sports will be back and we can be back to school and things will be normal. But we just don't know. And as our executive director has said 1,000 times, Dr. Robert Zayas has said, he's like, I'm done trying to predict this because that went out the window in March.
Yep. I mean, it's June 9th. I believe the Harbor Center was scheduled for March 9th. So that's like 3 months since then. And pretty much you were almost in the car ready to start driving.
I was in the car. I will always remember COVID and tie it to Buffalo and the Harbor Center only for this reason, was when we had to pull the plug on championships. I had rented my car, had my stuff packed, had my fancy suits ready to go, and I was on my way to Buffalo. And I was ready to make my plans to meet people for dinner or for drinks or whatever I was going to do. And before I got ready to go, we had one more meeting to talk about where we were at. And at this point, I've lost track of how it all came down the pike. And it was, Erie County had pulled the plug on mass gatherings, and the Harbor Center was going to let us come, but it was going to be without fans. And then we were going to let moms and dads come. And then it all happened so quickly that it was like, it's over. You know what I mean? We're at least on a pause. And I know in our case, it was, let's delay the championships. And we were hopeful that maybe things would change in late March or early April. And that came and went.
Yep. Chris, there was something else I wanted to ask in relation to that. Oh, I know what it was. Plus or minus 250 voicemails right now on your phone. Above or over under? What's the over under on voicemails?
Way under, because I'm too anal to let them stick there for more than a couple days. I just called the guy back who called me about a day ago about a cross country record. And I was like, I can't let that sit on my voicemail or I'm going to forget about it. So I called him back and left him a message. So now the ball's in his court. I can't look at that little icon on my phone.
It's obviously it's been tough for everyone, and you've answered it. I'm going to say roughly 5,000 times. When are we getting back? We don't know. We have no idea.
No.
Can you imagine?
We'd love to know. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Can you imagine a fall season without spectators, but also without a state championship, where they allow the fall season, but no leaving your region, if you will, for a regional quarterfinals, semifinals, Far West Regional, all that? Can you imagine a fall season with just playing within your specific section?
Not right now, because I don't want to. As much as it could be. Anything's in play right now, right? I mean, we're here in June, and we're talking about not only what a regular season or what practices would look like in August, 2 months away, but what do the playoffs look like now in late October into November? I just don't know. I mean, everything's on the table. Everything's in play. The biggest thing that we've always told people, and I think we continue to stress, is if it doesn't come from us, if you didn't hear it from our office or we're not the ones putting it out there, don't believe everything you read and you see. I mean, I love to dispel rumors because I think they just kind of churn the windmill. There have been no discussions from this office about shifting seasons. That's a big one that always comes up. Well, what if you did that? What if you moved baseball and softball to the fall, then moved football to the spring? And we haven't talked about that. There are so many other factors that something that huge isn't something we've talked about. So anybody who thinks, oh, well, I heard NYSPHSAA is going to do this, or, I heard they're going to move fall into winter and then play winter and spring together. We haven't had those discussions. We are simply trying to figure out, at this point, we knew spring was canceled weeks ago. We're trying to honor those seniors. The NYSPHSAA Senior Salute is going on right now on social media. We're trying to honor those kids. We will take the next couple months of the summer to see where we progress with COVID-19 and where we are come August. And, that's when practices would begin at the end of August for the fall.
Chris, how tough has it been as a dad, and how are you and your wife doing with the kids at home? Have you had to go back to school to relearn some subjects?
I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I can tell you that. I can do a lot of things well, but first grade and kindergarten homework is not my strong suit. I can tell you that. It's been a challenge. My kids are troopers. They split time between houses, and we kind of balance and juggle how we do it. And I'm able to work a couple days either from home or in the office, and Jamie is able to do the same thing. It's been a challenge. My kids have been rock stars, but I can tell you what, if I was going to go back and pick a new career, if 20-something-year-old Chris was going to go back to college and pick a new career, education would not be the one I would pick. I am not meant to be a teacher. I am not meant to be a stay-at-home anything, and I've learned that about myself. And I learned that relatively quickly in the month of March, I can tell you that.
Yeah, we have that conversation at home almost on a nightly basis, that we are not educators, we are parents, and
Yep.
Educators just do not get they just don't get the respect, and they are worth a lot more than what those checks are they're being cashed on.
I have said 1,000 times, I was like, teachers could come into a budget meeting and ask for $1 million a year, and I wouldn't hesitate to side, be like, yep, every penny of it. Everybody gets $1 million a year. Fine with me.
Exactly. Well, Chris, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for being a guest on Sportsline. We hope to have you again, and more than anything, we want to see you at a state championship soon. So we wish you nothing but peace and happiness until that point. I'm sure we'll be talking to you once we find out what the COVID task force recommends at a later date.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you, Frank. Thanks for having me on. And yes, I can't wait to be at a championship. I don't care what it is, where it is, or when it is, but it's going to be nice to be back around, high school sports again in person.